For the past 16 years, Montgomery College has hosted the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Conference, a celebration of American literature. Coming up, you'll meet Maxine Hong Kingston, this year's recipient of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award. So please stay with us. Our conversation is just ahead. Hello, I'm Josephine Reed, host of On the Margin on WPFW 89.3 FM and Writers on Writing on Sirius Satellite Radio. And once again, Montgomery College has the pleasure of hosting the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Conference. It's a day-long celebration of American literature that includes workshops, readings, and discussions with noted authors. The highlight of each year's conference is the presentation of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award. Past winners of the award include such celebrated writers as Don Updike, E.L. Doctorow, Norman Mailer, Elmore Leonard, and Joyce Carol Oates. This year's award is being presented to Maxine Hong Kingston, a fitting addition to this list of honorees. Ms. Kingston is a gifted writer who has written 3 novels and several works of nonfiction about the experiences of Chinese immigrants living in the United States. She's also contributed to the feminist movement with her memoir, The Woman Warrior, which discusses gender and ethnicity and how these concepts affect the lives of women. She's received several awards for her contributions to Chinese American literature, including the National Book Award in 1981 for her novel, Chinamen. Welcome, Ms. Kingston. It's an honor to have you with us, and please accept our congratulations on receiving the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award for 2011.
Thank you, Joe.
It's really such a pleasure, and it really is such a pleasure for me, who I've just loved your work for years, and I'm such a fan, so I'm really honored to be here. You know, Maxine, writers begin as readers, and since you've just received, as we've said, the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award, tell me about your first reading of Fitzgerald.
I read Fitzgerald not knowing that he was famous or what was important, and so my first reading of Fitzgerald was the Crackup, and I just thought that was the most beautiful writing, and I wanted to write like that because I saw that he could write about his feelings. He could write about every thought. That description of the interior life was most important, and so that's the way I wrote. And this is as a teenager.
And that was his impact on your writing, that it was about feelings and it was about mood. And you started as a poet, didn't you? When did you, tell me about your experiences with poetry.
Well, I began as the moment I could talk. My mother said that I could talk when I was born, and that I spoke in poetry, and also that I talk story, and so this is and it was in Chinese, and so that was the beginning of my my life as an artist. It was composing Chinese poetry.
Chinese was your first language?
Yes.
When did you learn English? When you went to school?
Yes, I learned English when I encountered English when I went to kindergarten, and I don't think that I could really speak it until I was 7, 8.
Now, When you learned English, is that when you moved from poetry to prose, you might say?
Yes, I think, no, because I remember writing poetry in English also. So, so I think it's sort of all blended together. So no, I was writing poetry in English also.
Let's talk about your first book, The Woman Warrior, which is prose, but it's written so lyrically. It clearly is written by a poet as well. Can you tell me what went into creating that book? Why did you write it?
Well, I remember starting The Woman Warrior when I went to Lanai, which is a little island, a pineapple island in Hawaii, and just sitting in this hotel room of a small hotel with 10 rooms, and facing the wall, and not the sea or the beautiful scenery, but just facing the wall and jotting down words and sounds which indicated important scenes, and just beginning there, and also beginning with the line, don't tell anyone what I am about to tell you. And this is from my mother, which what she's doing is putting a taboo on the important stories. And so I just stated her giving of the taboo, and then making up my mind that I was going to break them and tell the stories and write them. And a way to free myself to write anything is to decide that it's all right if it never gets published, and that I never show anyone. But I needed to write it down.
That book is so extraordinary, and I wonder if you realize the gift that you gave all of us with that book. It is such a profound book, a profoundly important book, because in breaking your taboos, you somehow showed all of us how we could break them. Yes.
I do realize that I gave this voice, this way of seeing the world, and giving voice to not just myself, but to everyone. Toward the end of the book, I am actually bullying a silent girl. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I am saying, speak up, tell your story. And I'm not just saying it to her. I mean, as a little girl bullying another little girl, I am just talking to her. But when I write the book, I am saying to the world, you have stories, and you may think that they're particular to you, and you may think that they are small and unimportant, but tell your stories. I'm going to tell my story, so you tell yours too.
But what I think is so extraordinary about that book, and to me it really is one of the hallmarks of great literature, is that in the very particularity of your story, you're telling a universal story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure this is the way art always works like that. I think of it as Shakespeare, who says to us, you know, that the microcosm is in the macrocosm, mm-hmm. And when you tell the story, when you write the poem, you will live forever, and whoever reads it also will make you live forever.
Exactly. What fascinates me is when I read that book, I felt so strongly that I was reading about a dear friend of mine and her mother. They're Russian Jews who emigrated to England, but that battle and the stories her mother would tell her and the fight she was in with her mother for her immortal soul, but at the same time, the great love and devotion that was there. And when I gave her the book, I said, "This is the story of you and your mother," and she absolutely agreed.
Good. I have heard from immigrants from all over the world, and they will say, "This is my story." Or I will hear from, just from people who have, people who've ever been to school, people who've ever been bullied or bullied someone else, or people who've been in wars, and they will say, "Yeah, this is my story."
What's interesting, and I would like to talk about, part of what you do there is the issues of race and gender. It is absolutely in the foreground, clearly a very deliberate act on your part. And also quite trailblazing then. I mean, now it's what people do. When you did it, quite new.
When I wrote The Woman Warrior, and when I began writing in this way, I was very aware that that I need to make my way into American literature. I need to make my way into the literature that's written in English, and there are not characters like my characters. The American literature is not made of Asian people. There are even a few blacks that are making their way into American literature. So how are we going to do this? And to write these stories and to write people who are not white people, I knew that I was doing a pioneering act. Also to bring in myths that are not that are not the Greek and Roman myth. So the way was just to write the best you can and see what they could make of this. I had thought that maybe I will not be able to send it to a publisher in New York that would understand. So I was thinking, if I cannot find an American publisher, then I will try Britain, and I will try Hong Kong, and we'll see what happens. But I did find an American agent, an American publisher.
The other thing you did in that book is you found a way to translate an oral tradition into a written one. And you really did that by insisting on ambiguity.
Yeah.
Please talk about that.
The oral tradition or talk story is so amorphous and contains great ambiguity. Every time you tell a story orally, it's different, the oral stories are different according to who you tell the story to, because you find a person who needs a certain story, and then you tell it to fit that person. And so every time you tell the story, it's a new story. So what happens when you write it into text, and what we think about writing is that there is a definitive text, and then it's set as if carved in stone, and it can never be different. And so can I write in such a way that every time you read it, it's telling you a different story. And this story is for this particular reader, but it's also for another reader. I would love it if this were a story for little girls, but also how about men? Yeah, this is a story for men too, and it could be for sexes. It could be for the slave masters, but it could also be for slaves to read. It's for everyone, and so it was a matter of finding the language that could do it, and also my stories are coming from another language. And so the stories that my mother told, they're in Chinese. And so how can I translate it? And not just translate word for word, but to translate a whole culture and a way of storytelling into English and into the written word.
Part of what you also do is use magical realism to do that, which strikes me thinking about how much magical realism is used in Latin American culture, where, again, there's this layering of cultures. And exactly in your case, too, it's a layering of cultures. Cultures are overlapping and colliding. It seems like magical realism is a very good way of being able to get into that texture.
Yeah, because there, in magical realism, you're able to write about daily mundane life, but also the mythic life that's around us, and also there's another layer of superstition, and another layer that's science, and then the many layers of the different cultures that we all come from. When I went to China soon after the Cultural Revolution, and I met many Chinese writers and artists, and they were trying to figure out, what do we write after Cultural Revolution? Because in the Cultural Revolution, they destroyed modernism and modernity, and they also destroyed the feudal. And so now what do they have left? Where are they going? And I was very gratified to see them look to me as someone who was able to escape those conditions. They saw me as I was free in America. I could do whatever I wanted, and I could do all kinds of experiments with the literature. And so I was writing in this way that we're now calling magical realism, and so they were looking to the Latin Americans and to me and to my writing as a way that Chinese writers can go.
It's interesting that the woman warrior is seen, certainly, it's literature, and it happens to be feminist as well, that your next two books, the point of view changes, and you're writing from the point of view of a man. How was that for you? Was it fun? Did it take a while to get comfortable doing that, both with Chinamen and Tripmaster Monkey?
Well, what I was... the way I was thinking was that a really evolved woman, a really evolved feminist, would then be able to understand men, and it's not an evolved writer, a very good writer that can do more than one's own point of view. Mm-hmm. And you get into the point of view of the other. And a very foreign other is a man. And I was thinking, I had read about Tolstoy and about all of these great novelists that, what an amazing thing Tolstoy was able to do. He could write Anna Karenina. And so I thought, wow, that's what I need to do. I need to write a man's book. And so China Men, so from the many men's point of view. Then when I got to Tripmaster Monkey, I loved the way men spoke during the 60s. I heard slang and the hip language as coming from men. Women were not speaking like that. And so I wanted to use that language, the slang language of the 60s. And there were so many new, there was new language that was coming out. The language of the experiments being done with drugs and psychedelics, and the new language of the of politics, when we were having the be-ins and the lie-ins and the peace demonstrations, and so I wanted a book in which I was free to use that language, and not just slang, but woman warrior and China men. I was always bringing in the language of China, and that I was translating people who spoke Chinese and figuring out a way how to translate their speech into English. In Tripmaster Monkey, I was free to forget about Chinese. I just wanted to write the American language, the new American language, and that's my language, because I grew up, in the 60s and had the fun of that. And so Tripmaster Monkey was my American book, and no more of this Chinese.
Yes, and Whitman, of fifth generation Chinese American, who you've called your avatar. Yeah. I love a broad margin in my life.
I love a broad margin to my life.
To my life, I'm sorry. I'll take that again. I love a broad margin to my life. That is a line from Thoreau, mm-hmm. and that's your latest book that you wrote as a poem. Mm-hmm. Why the decision to move from prose back to poetry?
Well, it's in my older age, I'm going back to what I was doing as a child. And my other thinking was that Tripmaster Monkey took me 10 years, and the fifth book of Peace was 12 years. And I thought, well, I am becoming older, and I can't afford to spend 10, 12 years per book. And but poetry is short, and poetry is easy, because poetry is a gift from the muse. I just wait for the gift, and poetry is it does not. I don't have to write the great big scenes, and I don't have to write characters where I describe everything. In poetry, I can just find the essence of each person, and I can write the essence of the atmosphere of every scene. And so this is why I want the brevity the condensation of poetry, and I did it, and it only took 4 years.
Maxine Hong Kingston, thank you so much, and let me congratulate you once again. So well deserved. It's such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you officially again for taking the time to be with us here today. We're grateful for the insights you've shared with us, and once again, congratulations on receiving the 2011 F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. In addition to this interview, Montgomery College Television will also be airing major portions of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Conference, so be sure to check with the MCTV website for air dates and times. Thanks again for watching.